with my I can remember going up to pay the cashier, and there were two young women on the corridor of that particular hospital, and they were talking, looking at the different rooms and the labeling that they have on it and so on. And one of the young women said, look, this room here is where they perform abortion services. And I know this because she shared that this is where she went and accessed such a service. But in her conversation, she said, look, I don't care who here. She has no shame about it. And I kind of kept this particular scenario with me because how she was talking about abortion. Now, she wasn't exactly whispering or loud, and I wasn't really focused into their business. I just wanted to get along my own business. But it was interesting in the way that this still remains a very taboo subject in our context, still very much seen as a very private type of an issue. And it's not just from a rights-based perspective, but it's also the social implication and mental well-being as well. So looking at the faces, I'm going to end my rambling here now. I know we want to get into the panelist presentation, which I trust is going to be very insightful because they're coming from, the religious perspective. You have the implications within our hinterland communities and other gender and sexual minority communities, as well as one of the key persons who was very prominent in having this law here on our books. Now, I know that Guyana is touted as having this progressive law within the region, but there's still a lot of work that we need to do. And I'm sure this will also come out as part of the panelist presentation. And I hope that those present here with us and online can raise some questions to see, what are our takeaways and what can we do going forward. So with that, I'll now like to invite one of the key organizers for this program, Ms. Charlena Nagier, to do her grounding and then carry us through the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Excuse me. Right. So I am not the most technically savvy person, so excuse the hiccups. Hopefully everyone can hear and see both in person and online. So I have a few opening remarks. So again, greetings, happy Friday. I know some of you are maybe looking forward to this weekend a bit more than other weekends for these special Mother's Day treats. But of course, we know every day is Mother's Day, right? And let's not forget Mother Earth, which is, without her providing us sustenance and shelter and all the other things we need to survive, we wouldn't be here. So as we look forward, though, I invite us to look back a little bit. So 5 days and 30 years ago, on May 4th, 1995, something historic happened in Guyana. A bill was passed in Parliament, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, for short, which legalized abortion in Guyana. And when I say that this was historic, I'm not exaggerating. This law enshrined the fundamental rights of Guyanese women to safe motherhood and safe abortion. And to date, Guyana is one of only 2 countries in the Latin America and Caribbean region with such a law, which makes abortion available on demand legally available on demand without any reason or any permission needed in the first 8 weeks of pregnancy. So there's a lot more to the act than that. And we have, as Dr. Edwards mentioned, some persons on the panel today who were crucial players in that campaign back in 1995 to get the bill passed and abortion legalized. And I'm very happy and grateful that we're going to get a chance to hear from them and interact with them very shortly. But as we look backwards and forwards, we also need to look at where we are currently. So 2025 is not even halfway over, but already over a dozen women and girls aged 4 to 64 have been murdered. Janelle David, Bibi Fazila Ali, Parbudai Budra, Shamiza Mohammed, Mickey Miguel, Kenisha Vaughn, Migueli Centano, Rihanna Ambrose, Marissa Beat, Mendonza Ronaldo, Malini La Cruz, Waveney La Cruz, Suan La Cruz, and last but certainly not least, Adriana Young. So while some may be celebrating this weekend, many others wouldn't be. The people of Sudan, Congo, Palestine, and Haiti, for example. So this is where we are currently, locally, globally, ecocide, genocide, and femicide, coupled with systemic and widespread failures of state institutions and a gross lack of accountability. This is our current reality. So while here in Guyana, we have the historic Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act promoting safe motherhood, we sadly do not have a culture of prioritizing and safeguarding human life outside of the womb. In fact, one could argue that what we're seeing in society now is people who don't know love. Maybe people who are not wanted as children, people who are not parented healthily, who have a lot of unresolved trauma. So we're not here to celebrate. We're also not here to debate. There's nothing to debate, right? Abortion is essential healthcare. Access to safe abortion saves lives. When abortion is criminalized and stigmatized, the people that need and seek abortions are forced into dangerous, life-threatening situations. Bottom house abortions from people who may or may not know what they're doing. So when abortions are not accessible, either not available or not affordable, people who need them are forced into parenthood. And we can laugh and say, well, nobody's ever really ready for parenthood, right? But when you think about how life-altering becoming a parent is, how the amount of resources needed, not just financial, although that's substantial, but also physical, as well as the mental and emotional resources required to care for and mold a whole new life, right? Some of us can't even keep a plant alive. Parenthood is serious work. Maybe the most important job in the world. Forget about being president or CEO or whatever, right? And the fact is that many people who seek abortions are already parents. They already know this reality of childbearing and child rearing and how much work it is. So when safe abortion is not available to people, and those persons are forced to seek unsafe abortions, it's not just their lives that are negatively affected, but the lives of all their existing children as well. So when abortion is stigmatized, when there's no education about abortion in school or anywhere else in the public domain. So when last did any of us here in Guyana see any billboards, any ads, any articles, any flyers or posters that had the word abortion in them, right? People seeking abortions have no idea where to go to get safe care. And then when people do get abortions, they're so shamed that many of them never speak about those experiences, and they carry around a weight for years, decades, sometimes the rest of their lives, which can affect their mental well-being, relationships, etc. Right? So I speak about this as someone who has lived this. This is my experience as well. There's still plenty of Guyanese who don't know that they have this right to legally access abortion. Safe abortion care is still not available in the majority of regions in Guyana, especially the hinterland areas. So in some ways, too many ways, actually, it's as if May 4th, 1995 never happened. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but so tragically, still, we have still lost persons to unsafe abortion, even after having the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. We remember Camille, 22, mother of 4. Karen, 18, mother of 2. Lelauti, 30, mother of 1. And Athena, 23, mother of 2. So yeah, we're not here to celebrate or debate. There's still way too much work to do. We're here to reflect and to get re-energized so that when we leave this room and this Zoom, we leave as stronger advocates for safe abortion, committed to taking action to ensure that all persons know that abortion is legal in Guyana, that there's nothing to be ashamed of about wanting or getting an abortion, that abortion is safe, that abortions are common, that abortion is not a bad word or thing. So let's see how many times you could work the word abortion into your next sentence. And that blaming, shaming, and judging people who get abortions must end. Everyone has the right to decide what to do with their bodies and lives, and we must just support each other. So with that, I'm going to lead us into a brief grounding activity, really briefly, wherever you are. If you are in front of the computer or sitting here, I invite you to close your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to, but just settle into where you're seated and let's take some deep breaths together. We'll do this together. We breathe in and out and hold it for as many seconds as we can. So deep breath in. Do another one. Deep breath in. Hold it and then out. So just a simple, if you close your eyes, sometimes you can focus on what you're hearing, not the thoughts in your head, but the sounds you might be hearing, my voice, you might be hearing the fan, you might be hearing traffic or birds. See how your body feels. How does your Bamsi feel in the chair that you're sitting in, right? You know, the overseas people, they say sit bones. How do your sit bones feel? I don't know what sit bones are. I know what Bamsi is. So how does your Bamsi feel wherever you are? Okay, you can open your eyes and you can do, this is a practice you can do wherever and whenever you need to. So throughout the rest of this event, feel free to just do that, take some deep breaths. It's still a heavy topic for people. So before the panel, I'm actually going to invite, so we have some folks here who are going to be reading some abortion stories that have been collected. So we are not going to ask questions, we're just going to read. If you have questions, you could note them for later. But right now, we're just listening to some stories of persons who have had abortion. So I invite our friends from GRPA.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine. I'm from GRPA and okay, is this better? Great. This is Shaquille Rodney. He's also one of our project associates. Sorry. I'll be reading a story about M, synonymous. So you guys did about them. Yes, you're good.
Okay, so the background to the story, it's 1989. Abortion is not yet legal in Guyana. So M is a 19-year-old University of Guyana student. She's unmarried and doesn't have any children yet. Her boyfriend at the time is another young UG student. Yeah.
My boyfriend. Okay. I missed my period. I didn't take no pregnancy test. I didn't know about pregnancy tests. I didn't know about those things. It was 1989. I was 19. There was no sex education in school, none of that. I didn't grow up in a household where anyone talked about sex, but I had a boyfriend and I was having sex. I knew about condoms and he said he's not using those, that there's a way to time it so you don't get pregnant and whatever. And I went along with that until I missed my period. I told him, listen, I'm pregnant. We have to do something about it. I can't have a child right now. I was afraid. Of course, there's all the things that come with that, right? Being pregnant and unmarried. I was in university. Both of us were in university. I had already experienced the shame and stigma that comes with unplanned pregnancy from my older sister being pregnant twice. She went through those things. Sorry. Pregnancies, yes. She went through those with, yes. She went through with those things, pregnancies. And I saw how she was treated by family members, how she was talked about. My grandmother told her she got pregnant again. She was going to put her out, all of these things. I knew I'd be letting my mother down because she was 19 when she had her first child. Based on everything that I was told when I was growing up, this was definitely one of those things. You don't get pregnant. There was no talk about menstrual cycle. There was no talk about sex or anything like that. It's like you were just supposed to know what to do. Anyway, so I told him that I missed my period. He also said he wasn't ready to have children. I said, you have to be there. I don't want to go through this by myself because I didn't get myself pregnant. Neither of us had any information about what to do in a situation like this. He talked to somebody, I don't know who, but whoever it was told him where to go because, again, neither of us knew anything. Where to go, who to talk to, what needed to happen. Neither of us had that info. They told him to go to the hospital on Carmichael Street, Woodlands. I can't remember how much it cost, but however much it was, neither of us had it. I was trying to think of who I could ask for this much money without letting them know I needed it for, what I needed it for. He did the same thing. I went to my grandfather because my mother was studying overseas at the time. She wasn't around. I couldn't go to my grandmother because she didn't have any money. My father wasn't here, so I went to my grandfather. I told him some story to try to get the money from him. He said he couldn't give me all of it, that he could give me some, but I had to come back maybe 2 or 3 days later. I went back and he gave it to me. My boyfriend also got some money from wherever. He used to get money, stipend or something like that. I think that's what he used. He didn't pay his rent for that month. So then we had enough. He made the appointment and we went together. I peed in a cup and they confirmed the pregnancy. You had to pay up front. Then they told you when to come back 2 days later. I was very impatient. There was no counseling or anything. I was lost somewhere in space thinking about this, being afraid, thinking about the shame and the stigma, the this and the that, thinking I might die, but I have to do this because there's no other option here. The staff at the hospital just did their job, weren't saying or doing anything to make me feel bad, but I was projecting judgment. Went in feeling shame and stigma. It didn't take long. He was sitting on the bed when I woke up, just waiting for me to wake up. There was nobody else there with the other girls who went through this procedure at the same time. I did. They didn't have anybody there with them. There was no conversation, just people looking at each other and looking away. I didn't talk to anybody before or after I had my abortion. I didn't know anybody who had an abortion, or I should say, no one ever told me that they had an abortion, but I must have heard something because I knew about them. I knew that was the thing to do, but I didn't know anyone personally. Part of what built the story among the fear that I likely read that people died getting abortions. I knew about hangers, women using hangers. I was like, I'm not doing that. I also thought that I wouldn't find myself in that situation, but then I did. And I was like, okay, this is how it happens. Just like that. Then you have to make this choice. I only talked about this before with my gynecologist and one other person, the person who I married. He never held that against me. He never brought it up later or in an argument or anything. That was a game changer for me in terms of how I felt about how I thought about myself. Not him perpetuating the negative narrative that I've been telling myself, may be able to forgive myself. Because he didn't hold that against me, I felt accepted. And I stopped carrying the shame around after that. I still don't talk about it publicly. I wouldn't sit in a room of people that have a conversation about it. I don't feel comfortable talking about it like that, just openly. There's still a part of me that maybe doesn't feel safe. Also, something about acceptance. That thing about me being a people pleaser might be playing a part in this, where it's kind of like I don't want my name being blemished. To men specifically, be like my boyfriend. Be there, but let the woman make the choice. Be there with her all the way, from the beginning to the end. Your relationship might not survive it, but leave that for another day. For the time that this is going on, just be there. In a lot of cases, the woman needs the support and may not be able to get it from anywhere else. And it makes a difference. To women, I would tell them this is your choice, and you can feel like you're going to let people down by doing it, or feel um ostracized by doing it. But at the end of the day, in many instances, you know what's best for you. And if you know that having a child is not in your best interest and you have the power to do something about it, you should. Otherwise, you're bringing a life into the world that you may not particularly want. Like you're doing it, having a child under duress, you're doing it out of fear. You're having this child for all these other reasons other than it's a beautiful thing. In a lot of instances, these children get neglected because of the parents are young. Somebody else has to take care of the child because the parents are not capable, they can't afford it. The father's not around, those type of things. So if you weigh these things and it turns out that it probably makes the most sense for you to have an abortion, then you should do it rather than bringing a life into the world you then kill in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, we have another story. Angelita, I'll invite her to come up and read. But we just need to do a bit of Zoom housekeeping in the meantime. Okay, Angelita?
Everyone, good morning. I'll be reading M's second abortion story. I was 22, 23, the second time I had an abortion. I blame myself for this one. I met this guy. I kind of knew that he was trouble, but I didn't pay attention to that. I still sort of started dating him. We went out a couple times. He used to drive a car. I did like the car. It was a two-door sporty. He had decked out the back with speakers. I went out with him a couple times. Then he wanted to have sex. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I had sex with him maybe twice. We did have a conversation about unprotected sex beforehand. I was like, I'm not into that. The first time he put on the condom, I saw him, didn't have to say anything. That was that. And then I didn't see him for a while. I didn't really want to see him anymore, so I was avoiding him. Then one day he showed up at my house and knocked on the door. I didn't know it was him. I opened the door and he was there. So then we had sex. That time, I didn't make sure that he put on a condom. I kind of just expected that he would, but he didn't. Afterwards, I realized that this guy was problems. But then I missed my period and realized that this was what was going on again. Now I'm dealing with the fact that I'm about to do this again because I was stupid and I trusted someone who wasn't trustworthy. I was working at the time, but I wasn't making a lot of money. What I did was save. I didn't pay the rent for 2 months so that I would have the money. Then I called a clinic and told them this is what I needed to do. They said, okay, you can come and do it, but you have to bring somebody with you. I said I don't have anybody to bring with me. I was living with my sister at the time, but by then she was already becoming a church girl. so I couldn't tell her about this. They told me that I couldn't leave by myself after having the procedure. I spoke to a friend of mine who was in school with me, who drove taxi about picking me up. So then I had to get taxi money on top of all the other money. I went, paid, had the procedure done. The difference between this and the other time is that I didn't see a bunch of other people. I was in a room by myself. The procedure happened in that room. Then they left me to recover there. My friend came, picked me up, and took me there. I didn't tell him what I did. This was a regular guy clinic, so he wouldn't guess. That was it. I did not speak of it. There was no one I felt like I could talk to about it. I didn't tell anybody I had done it. I felt shame, and I didn't want to be judged, put in a box of being one of them. Because this was the second time, I was beating myself up even more. Like, you did not learn your lesson. For a second time, for a long time, sorry, when I was younger, it was a thing, a cloud of shame that I walked under. My abortion experiences have allowed me to be less judgmental of other people as well as towards myself, to be more compassionate in situations like this. Where I would not have been as compassionate when I was younger, I'm now more compassionate. When I see these situations, it's easier for me to understand the nuance and not just think in black or white. M's message for young people in Guyana. For young people in particular, I would tell them it's very, very easy to become pregnant. Very, very easy. And so if you don't want to become pregnant, you have to actively take steps to prevent pregnancy. I would say learn about sex, read up about it, look at the videos, not porn, but educational videos. Learn about birth control, learn about using condoms, male and or female, and practice safe sex, not just for pregnancy, but also for prevention of disease transmission, because that is also rampant. Your parents might not tell you anything about sex, and you might have the same type of stigma and shame around it that I grew up with. But unless you take matters in your own hands, you will end up pregnant. Thank you.
Okay, one other story, and then we start our panel discussion. So now it's 1996. Abortion has been legal in Guyana for 1 year. So Cece, 23, is the mother of a 2-year-old girl. She's in a relationship with her daughter's father, but it's not a happy situation. He's unfaithful, and their financial situation is unstable. Cece has been feeling sick for a little while. She remembers having similar symptoms when she was pregnant the first time. She takes a pregnancy test, but the result is negative. However, she continues to feel sick and remembers that she also missed her period. Thank you.
I had my first child already. She was almost 2 years old. I didn't want another baby so soon. I wasn't sure that I was pregnant because I did a pregnancy test and it came back negative. But I was feeling sick, the same way I felt the first time I was pregnant. I remember the symptoms and I said, let me go and do a check. The test came back negative, but my period still didn't come. So I knew. I didn't speak to anybody about it other than my partner. I told him I wasn't feeling well. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but that I thought that I might be pregnant. He didn't want me to have an abortion. He wanted a son. I told him, no, we're not getting no son because I'm not doing this. We can't afford it. He didn't agree. He told me to go and do a test. I showed him my negative pregnancy test, but said I was still feeling sick and I wanted to go and see the doctor. We went to Woodlands. I didn't want my partner to come with me in the room with the doctor. So when I saw the doctor, I tried to signal that to him. The doctor picked up on the signals I was throwing him and told my partner to wait outside the room. that it was protocol, he told him. When we were alone, he said, talk to me. I said, I'm sure that I'm pregnant, but I don't want another baby. He asked if I had a child before. I said yes, and I told him her age. He asked me why I wanted to do this, and I started explaining. This man, right now, I don't know. I Right now, I don't know that I want to make any more children for him. He's unfaithful. The doctor said, you sure you want to go down the road? I said, yes. He said, okay, so what are we going to tell him? I said, you're the doctor, you got to figure it out. He laughed. Anyway, he examined me and said, yes, I was pregnant. He said I needed to do an ultrasound so he could see how far gone the pregnancy was before he could decide to agree to do the abortion. He asked me if I ever did a termination before. I said no, and that I was scared, but I didn't want to be pregnant. He said, we're going to work it out, and sent me to do the blood test, a urine test, and then the ultrasound. He spoke to my partner, made up a story to tell him, and said that he had to run tests to see what was going on with me. When the results came back, he told my partner, this girl is very ill. We have to take her to emergency theater to do a surgery. That got my partner scared. Then the doctor asked if he had the money to pay. The fee was $5K or something, which was plenty money back then. My partner paid and left because he had to go back to work. The doctor almost didn't do the abortion because I wasn't supposed to have eaten before, but I didn't know that and had eaten breakfast. I begged and explained how far I come from and that I left my small child home. I came from Tilbury's doc. I can't go back without getting this. I left my child home. Me mother in know what I come to town for. Please, you gotta help me. He finally agreed. I asked him what I should expect and what would happen after, and so I wanted to know everything. And he explained. The ultrasound showed that the pregnancy was a week short of 3 months. I met a lot of people there that day who came to do the same thing. About 12 to 13 other women were also there for abortions. The majority of them were East Indian and not from GT. A lot of them were young, my age group and younger. I became pal friends with one of the girls in particular. I was scared and she was scared too. There was a long waiting time and a lot of people going in and coming out. I was tense, kept peeping in the wire to see if people woke up. When it was my turn, the doctor and about 3 other nurse assistant people were in the room with me. One came and gave me anesthesia. Another came and gave me small talk. Another one was prepping me. I lost consciousness, but still heard talking from a distance. Felt like I was in a tunnel. I didn't feel anything though. When I woke up, I had some disorientation, wasn't sure where I was at first. The nurses were nice and friendly though. I had no issue with any of them. They were very helpful. It was dark by the time I left the hospital. The doctor told me that I should stay in town that night and don't travel far. My partner came back and collected me from the hospital after he finished his work. I didn't tell him that I had gotten an abortion. I told him to take me to my cousin's house. Usually when I come to town, I'd stay by my aunt, but I couldn't go there because she would have asked questions. So I went to my cousin instead. I told her I needed to lie down a little bit. She wanted to know what was going on because remember, I don't usually go by her to sleep. I told her I had just come from the hospital. Mind you, she, my cousin, was a nurse at the same hospital. So of course she wanted to know why I went to the hospital. I told her that I just got an abortion. She asked me why I hadn't talked to her before. And I told her I wasn't sure what was going on and that when I found out, I just made a quick on-the-spot decision. She told me she was glad I was okay and that I had to get on contraceptives. She gave me a warm towel to put on my belly and in the morning, some hot water to sit over. I had some crumbs the next day, but I had to travel back to Berbice. Remember, I had left my 2-year-old daughter with my mother, but they didn't know why I come to town and what was going on, and that I was going to stay overnight. Back then, we didn't have cell phones like now. So I lied to my mother when I went home. I told her when I went to the doctor, he said I was having a miscarriage. So they had to do a cleanup. That was what I told her. I didn't tell her that I had gotten an abortion. The cramps and so stopped, and I was fine after a couple of days. I was just feeling guilty that I lied to my mother. When I told her the lie and saw the look on her face, I felt some guilt because the two of us were close, and I had to lie to her because I didn't want her to feel bad. The guilt was just from lying, though. I had no regrets about what I did because that was exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I couldn't afford to have another child at that point. I was the backbone of my family. My mother's brace, running the whole family, minding children, my sister's children, my partner's outside children. While I never went publicly about my abortion experiences, I have never kept it a secret. I've discussed it with my children, siblings, and some close friends. I don't talk about it publicly only because I don't want my children to be stigmatized by others who might hear my story, recognize me, and have negative things to say to them. That's the only reason. CC's message to Guyanese about abortion is, I would like to tell all Guyanese that abortion is illegal and that they should not judge a woman for making that choice. CC's message to young people about abortion is, to the young people in Guyana, I would tell them, while abortion is legal, it is not a joke or a game. If not done properly, it can be fatal. Prevention is better than cure. Make every effort to protect yourself. CC's message to men about abortion. Safe sex is a responsibility of both parties involved. Men, it is not your call to decide whether a woman gets pregnant or keeps the pregnancy, or more so, to decide how many children a woman must or must not have. If a woman feels that she doesn't want the pregnancy, she has the right to decide what to do and doesn't have to ask your permission. Thank you.
So maybe we can give a hand to the speakers. Thank you all so very much. I know we're eager to hear from the panelists, but we can be talking about abortion and not hear the experiences of persons who have actually had abortion. So, but if you have questions or comments, save them. So now we will start our panel presentation. I want to invite our panelists who are here to sit at the head table. I will start introducing them. Go ahead. So our first panelist is actually online via Zoom. That's Dr. Fred Nunes. So Dr. Nunes holds degrees in public administration, private management, and law. He lectured at UG for 12 years, then worked with UN, UNDP, PAHO, and the World Bank for another 22 years. While with PAHO in Guyana from 1990 to 1996, he did research on abortion that contributed to the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act in 1995. He's a management consultant, executive coach, and an advocate for women's reproductive health. Dr. Nunes has 4 children and 4 grandchildren. So I'll introduce each speaker before they speak. So Dr. Nunes, do you want me to start your presentation now? And you can unmute.
Yes, yes. But let me make a couple of comments first, Charlena. First, I want to congratulate you and all the organizers for doing this because stories are far more important than data. What I have to share is mostly about data, and I really want us to recognize that the storytelling that you and your colleagues have organized is absolutely important for changing the culture of inertia and the problem of stigma. So I really want to make that point. I think the first question you asked me to respond to, Charlena, was how I got involved in this work, especially as a man. And that last phrase, especially as a man, raises a big challenge because I notice when I look at the audience, I only see a couple of names that seem to be names for men. which is a real challenge because, as the last speaker said, pregnancy is an equal opportunity reality. Women do not get pregnant by themselves. Um, so how did I get involved in this? Is I know what we probably would like to hear is some wonderful statement, but that's not true. I got involved in this out of frustration and embarrassment. I was the health management advisor with PAHO, and for 2 years, I had bust my chops trying to do work in that field, creating data systems for the Ministry of Health. And shortly after the elections in October, the elections were in 92, we were having a meeting with the new government. And it was a new government for the first time in 26 years, by the way, which means what? It meant that the new ministers, very, very few of them, I think not more than three, had any previous experience in government. And in this meeting, a few weeks after the new government, Dr. Keith Carter, some of you may know him, but I suspect all of you may know his father, Martin Carter. Dr. Keith Carter said, "Hey, Fred, don't you realize you're being abused?" I was surprised. I was shocked. I didn't understand what he was saying. He said, "Look, the ministry, these guys are just keeping you busy. They don't have any intention of using the data systems that you have provided. They're gathering these reports every month and they just throw them on the shelves." Well, that was painful for me because I really thought I'd been doing good work for 2 years. And I was so ashamed because I was dumb enough not to have seen this myself for 2 years. And I resolved then that I was determined to find a way to contribute to health in Guyana, not through the Ministry of Health, but in spite of the Ministry of Health. And so I held that view, and I was struggling, trying to find something to do. And then on December 25th, 1992, so just a few weeks later, so Christmas Day, I was in the office trying to make phone calls um, because the telephone system was just atrocious. There was no way I could make the phone call from where I was living, which was in Corrida Park at the time. Um, and I saw a report written by the late Michael Ben, which was a study, again, another study that I had asked to have done in order to inform drug purchases. Why? Because drug purchases were simply being made based on what we bought last year, not based in any sense on what the disease patterns were. And so I looked at this report, and could you show the first slide for me, Shalina? Shalina, could you show the first slide? Well, anyway, let me go ahead.
Yes.
The 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 report showed that septic abortion was the third highest cause of admission, um, and that incomplete abortion was the eighth highest cause. I was shocked. So let's go to the second. Yeah, that's the better slide to show. So you see what it's like there. And at that point, I decided, hey, I know exactly what I'm going to do. This is not merely a health problem. This is an artificial problem created by the law. So I said, hey, this is something I can probably do largely through my own efforts. And so I set out to do research. And I called a girlfriend of mine in Barbados. She's now happily my wife. We've been married for 29 years now. I asked her, gee, can you look in the West Indian Medical Journal? By the way, she was Guyanese physician working in Barbados. I said, hey, can you find any article in the West Indian Medical Journal dealing with abortion? She sent me two. And very quickly, what I did was I framed a survey of medical opinion about abortion in order to test to see whether, gee, is there any appetite in the health community to address this issue of abortion? And the results came back very, very positive, really very positive among physicians, less so among nurses. Nurses were generally quite conservative. Um, and I used that information and gave it to the Minister of Health. At that time, it was Minister Gail Teixeira. But what I found, and she then used that information to make the announcement that you're now seeing, which was on about May 15th, 1993, and that launched the campaign. There's an interesting story about that, which I will say. One of the things that we did, and this goes into the second question, Shirley. One of the things that we did is that we used a lot of letter writing. We launched a big letter writing campaign. But the letter writing was not terribly effective. And one day I was having a computer repaired. And it turns out that a young cartoonist was in the same office where I was having the computer repaired. His name was Paul Harris. And I said, Paul, how would you like to do some cartoons for me dealing with this issue of abortion? And we were off and running. And I would come up with the ideas and he would sketch them and we would work them out. And this was one that was very, very important, showing the different worlds. One being the lady at the top who can afford to go to a physician. We have heard some stories of those, and others being desperately unable to afford, unable to raise the money, who were then in the so-called bottom house abortion. Both of them appealing to God, but both of them with very different consequences and expectations. And by the way, I got into this without any knowledge of the field at all. So this is a wonderful case of fools rushing in. But it is important for fools to rush in because if you know too much, you may hesitate, you may do nothing. The second question you asked me to address, Charlena, was this issue of how did the MTOPA get passed in Guyana and who did what? What role did data play? I think data played a role only of sparking the discussion. I think what's much more important is the work that you're doing now, which really addresses the issue of stigma. But the cartoons that we did were very important. So let me run through some of these cartoons. This one that we have on the screen is a split of the plurality of views within the Christian community, and generally within the religious community. There are those who are dogmatic, who are on the left-hand side, at the top left, and who are literalists and dogmatic and relying on scriptures. And there are those on the bottom right who are much more pastoral and much more compassionate and much more the central message of Christianity, which is love thy neighbor. You know, and do what you can for the least of these. We also had to keep people alive so that they would not get lost in the very complicated process of law reform. And so we had these to illustrate the different stages that we have. And the next slide shows something else. The next slide shows the real slowness of the select committee. Can we get to the next one, Shalina? The real slowness of the selection committee, and how we had to put pressure on them. That was in Indra Chandrapal, who was leading that, but getting people together was very, very difficult. And then the last slide that we will look at, thank you, was this one of showing, okay, so we've got the law passed in 95. How do we get it implemented? And unfortunately and sadly, this is still a burning issue with respect to the very, very weak way in which the ministry has gone about implementing it. But let me back up and mention something. And then this one is the actual day after the law was passed, and that is the Starboard News reporting that. In the process of doing this work, clearly it was important to get help. And one of the interesting things about the announcement that let's hold the slide for a minute. Let's go back to the other one. One of the interesting things that that we ended up with was that the interesting thing of the cabinet, the very first slide that we looked at of Gail Teixeira making that announcement, sometimes mistakes are wonderful. Sometimes mistakes are way better than strategy. It turns out that because the government was so new and because the cabinet was so, and the ministers were so unfamiliar with the routines of government, Honorable Teixeira, I was pressing her to have a press conference. She had the press conference and made the announcement. I had assumed that she would have discussed this with cabinet. She hadn't. But it turns out, and this is interesting for you guys to know, it turns out that had she taken the matter to cabinet and followed the due process, we would probably not have had that law because Cheddar Jagan was furious when she had the conversation, when she had the press release. Furious because he said, hey, the Catholic Church kicked me out of power in the 60s. They put me back now in the 90s, and you reward them by doing this to them when you know this is the most important thing for the Catholic Church. How could you do this? They're going to throw me out again. Also, quite by accident. So sometimes mistakes are great. That's the real thing I want to get there. The other thing I want to mention, because my time is up, is that history is important. I was relatively new to Guyana. I knew nothing of the history of this debate, but I found a colleague of mine. We had been at UWI together as students, Tommy Payne, and Tommy Payne was an archivist. And I had Tommy do research in the archives, which gave me the complete story of the history of abortion efforts in Guyana, which was very important. Another name I need to mention is a nurse, Grace Bond. I went to the Campbellville Health Center to gather data with a survey, and she said, why are you doing the survey? Almost all of what you're asking for is in our records. And she had the courage and the trust to let me look at the records and extract the data, which I then did in a few other clinics. And that was moving from medical opinion to statistical data on abortions. And the third name I'll mention is Aubrey Williams, who was a senior planner at the Ministry of Health. And he was who actually shared with me the files of the law that had been proposed under the previous government, but never advanced, simply because what's his name? The Prime Minister, who was also Minister of Health, Hamilton Green, felt that it was too political and he didn't want to touch that. So let me stop there and I'll be happy to respond to and contribute to the rest of the discussion, Shalina. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Fred. So there's a third question, but we'll hear from the other panelists. Right, so thank you, Fred. We will come back to you after we hear from the other three panelists. So let me introduce the speakers in the room with us, head table. So we have Reverend Patricia Sheeratan-Bisnauth. One second, find the slides, right. So Reverend Pat, as she's known to many, is a faith-rooted Caribbean woman, an ordained minister, and an advocate for gender and social justice. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Family Planning Affiliation, leading regional efforts to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights with a focus on gender justice, equity, care, and accountability. She has one child, Krista Salhana, and two granddaughters, Chloe Vale and Evelyn Sky. The other panelists, we have Mr. Kobe Smith. Kobe is a human rights advocate and development professional with over a decade of progressive experience advancing sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice, both in Guyana and internationally. He currently serves as the executive director of the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, where he leads national efforts to expand access to sexual and reproductive health services, education, and advocacy for marginalized communities. We also have on the panel Ms. Laura George. Laura is a daughter of the proud Kapong Nation, also known as the Akawayo. She's a mother of 3 awesome and vocal daughters and grandmother to 2 beautiful boys. Laura has a background as a formal educator, having taught both in an Indigenous and non-Indigenous community. Laura is a fierce advocate for empowerment of Indigenous women and girls, for Indigenous people and women and girls in general. So let me just move the computer over there. I think you all need to maybe speak. Oh, of course. Folks on Zoom. So they each have different questions. Let me make that comfortable. Okay, so Reverend Pat, tell us more about how religious leaders were approached and gotten on board or neutralized, for lack of a better word, with this campaign. And tell us more about the work you did in 1995 to mobilize other groups of people, such as grassroots women, in support of the medical termination.
Right. Thank you so much. And let me add my gratitude, my deep thanks to Charlene for organizing this, and my colleague Fred. I really want to give Fred, a big up as, oh, it's here. I'm keep pointing to the back. He's right here. Yes, because Fred, was a key figure, driven by that passion. He spoke about it. And I got involved in this, for some time, as we know, in Guyana, many of us, older people, but younger people who have read up a lot of the stories, especially those from the 80s. There was a very infamous, there was a doctor who had a lot of allegations of raping women that came for abortion. Those stories were told a lot, was shared a lot in villages. You wouldn't find that in mainstream media too much. Yeah, he was, I think he was, I don't remember the date, in terms of when he was charged, he was his license taken away, and then he came back a few years after to regain his license. But I'm saying that the women from religious communities were also talking about this. For me in particular, I am a minister, an ordained minister of the Guyana Presbyterian Church, these stories were being shared by women, and me being a pastor, not so easily, shared with me until, women can trust, that I'm not judgmental. And in this church, which began as a Canadian mission in the 1800s after the abolition of slavery, there was a lot of what they call cottage meetings in homes. So this continues up to today, where there'll be prayer meetings, Thanksgiving services in people's homes. And these I find the best, expression of church, because you know what? That's where people then come to talk authentically. And for some reason, a lot of these are organized by women. And for some churches, I was surprised at first, if it's a birthday, these women will organize, but seeing the men, including their husbands and sons around. So it became a place where women would share stories. So these stories of abortion were, shared in the context of when they started to talk about, it's a time when they talk about, men and the man in their lives, the arranged marriages, and Mina likely a tal, and up to now, Mina like after 50 years. And to say that the work that was done really centers around, the women, and thanks a lot for those stories which were read, and thanks to those women that who shared, you know, their experiences. So it was not born overnight. It was born out of, you know, a lot of pain. It was born, you know, out of an urgency, you know, necessity, but yes, urgency. And it was born out of, you know, courageous, persistent organizing. And I mentioned, you know, Fred here. I think, yes, we do have, I do celebrate that moment when the act was passed. And actually, I must mention this because it's a good lesson for us to have, especially in these times. It brought, you know, the government and the opposition, two sets of people across to vote for this. I remember work done by Gail Teixeira and Indrani Chandrapal. I remember my own husband, Lady Bisnauth, who was also quite an advocate for this and working with the churches as a religious person of influence. I remember Dr. Faith Harding, who worked. So yes, it took it was groundbreaking for us to cross barriers because our hearts told us that this is something that we must do. Friends, let me share very briefly, her name was mentioned, because I think, you know, the experiences of people, and I did meet the relatives of Camille Arjun, the 22-year-old Guyanese from Berbice, but she was living with her family just across the Quarantine River at 22 years and had 4 children. Their ages were 2, 3, 5, and 7, and she was pregnant, and she needed urgently services. So she told her husband, she told her mother she's going to a wedding. There was a wedding, of course, and she told her husband she'll also go for family planning services. And actually, it was her second visit for abortion services in 5 months, right? 22 years old, 4 children, all right? Living in poverty. And she thought that she didn't have the possibility to really say what was really on her mind. And can you imagine a situation like that? Well, we've heard, you know, these stories, and these were not, you know, lies. They were really language of survival, of women who need to survive. And so, like so many women, you know, we cannot speak often openly about our bodies. We cannot speak clearly and honestly about our choices and our needs. And to do this, we know that it invites, you know, shaming, blaming, and even worse. We heard that from the story. So on a solemn Good Friday morning, in April 2015, she arrived at this Bottom House clinic, a space which was not licensed, not regulated, but open for business of women with nowhere else to go. This, I should say, was the 20th year, 2015, right? My math is good. In 1995, this is happening the 20th year, where she didn't have an option of anywhere else to go. So she asked her aunt to accompany her, and, you know, there she was, you know. So the photographs and the stories, you know, are still there in the newspapers, you know, small frame woman, but carrying so much of the weight of an unjust and uncaring system. Friends, she entered, you know, alone, as would happen in clinics like this, no nurse, no attendant. And then the aunt started to get worried because it was about an hour and she didn't come out as yet. And then shortly came the doctor and said she didn't make it. It just came out. And the aunt started to bawl and holler, and he said, no, you can't do it. Come. So it was not even compassion, it was control, to control. So friends, Camille, you know, and other women who suffered and who died, these women who really, they're among many whose lives were sacrificed on the altar of those of us who are silent, you know, and we are silent. We are carrying still these weapons of our beliefs and these systems that deny women, you know, their agency over their own bodies. And so, friends, I come back to, I wanted to share this story because, you know, the family actually, interestingly, I was sitting in a meeting of the board of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Advisory Board, it's called. And the family came in. They probably heard we were meeting, and they came, and they were so distraught. They were so, I could never forget, you know, meeting these people. But what they came for, well, the news is here because I have to ensure the story in terms of the paper that they had. They needed a certificate, an official document to take the body across, because I think we should dig deeper into what that autopsy said. And they had no money in which to do this. They had a piece of paper. That's what they had. And so they came begging for assistance so that his body could be taken, or so that they can get the kind of documentation to take across. And so we see that, you know, what is really needed, and women that I know from within my churches and within the communities, you know, in which I worked, they will tell you about, you know, the lacking. And yes, I am part of a religious system, really, which is complicit in the death, you know, of these women, because, you know, lacking of moral courage, because we are required, you know, to lift the veil on what is happening, and, you know, those also unpacking the beliefs and practices that treat women's bodies as battlegrounds for moral control. And so really creating a space for informal, from my experience, informal discussion with women, you know, and a lot of these women from women's groups. And so they're older women in 60s, 70s, and some also in their 40s, but largely older women. And their experience, that was, you know, that was food for me, you know. I felt I was nourished, you know, by these stories in terms of how I got involved, and I was happy to see what was happening, and also to speak. Yeah, I'm on number 2, but just to say, to speak about their experiences about family planning and the prohibition. You know, some women had to hide their pills in vitamin bottles because their husbands and in-law, whoever, prohibited them. Why? Why? Because it was seen as something that would encourage promiscuity, you know, that they could go have sex with, you know, with other men. And so, yeah.
So I can go on.
Yeah, go on. I'm a preacher, right?
That's what you do, right? But one of the first times I actually had a conversation with somebody about abortion in a church was with Ms. Pat. So she's very good at having these conversations with people. But let me ask her another question, then we'll come to the other part. So as head of the Caribbean Family Planning Affiliate, how does Guyana's medical termination of pregnancy law, how does that stack up? What can other, because I know there might be persons on the Zoom from other Caribbean countries, what can they learn from us in terms of how to increase access to safe abortion in their countries? What would you tell them?
Yeah, so we've worked with Caribbean countries across, you know, 13 islands and mainlands. The laws are restrictive, and they're very degrees of to the point of being you know, prohibition in some places. The French really are on top of things because they have liberal laws. So in Guadeloupe, you find that, and amazing, you know, what's the island? St. Martin and St. Martin, a small island front street, middle street, back street, but it's 2 countries, and the French side is so, you know, people would travel, you know, and you got to go to the French side because the Dutch side, even if somebody on the Dutch side wanted abortion, you know, you can't have it. For Guyana, I was shocked. I was working abroad when I came back to see, that was 2012, that still women could, because I started to work at GRPA then and found out that women still could not access abortion. What was happening favored, well, it was targeted, I would say, against poor women because they couldn't pay for it. So rich women could pay for it, and the fees were quite high. In some cases, you know, it's, you know, per week. I heard these stories because of women who had needs and could not have abortion. Anyway, by the time we were, we played an important role to get and got the support of the Ministry of Health, and you know, IPPF, WHR, the Western Hemisphere region, to be able to push through to get training because we needed to have doctors in the first place. So what happened is, like Trinidad, I would say that yes, yeah, there are gains made for every woman that was able to receive services. And so lots of women started to sign up for services when we offered, and we were happy. As you can recall, even the family planning clinic, because Charlene was one approaching me, the family planning clinic at the public hospital was not offering. Then they started 2 days, 3 days, and then they went to a week, right? So it happened. But women from Trinidad, you know, they began to call us, and we would make special arrangements, like on a Saturday that, you know, they fly in the morning, they fly out in the evening. Why? Why must, and you know, it means that you have to have means to be able to get that. My heart used to go out to the poor Brazilian women across the border who used to call. They're in desperate need. They even used to ask us to find places for them to stay, you know, economically. Some of them have their passport to come to Guyana. So across the Caribbean, Fred is doing a lot of work, continues the work through Aspire. He is, you know, a leading person, doing a lot of surveillance data. They're very, very important, and this push, and also the challenges. I'm not going to say these things because I'm sure Fred is going to talk about the challenges to the law and the moves being made in Antigua and Dominica. Jamaica has made 2 attempts. And of course, you know, the major hurdle is crossing the religious hurdle. And as we know, it gets pretty intense among the Christians, all right? And from 1995 to now, a lot of dynamics, a lot of things have changed also. Mainline churches, such as mine, Anglicans, and so, they are weaker. And yeah, okay, after, we talk about that after. But this has, you know, a lot of impact in terms of the work that we need to do. We have done work with some of the family planning associations themselves, you know, not really too ready for it. And yes, Shirley, you were helping us with that in terms of how do we begin the education and the awareness. So a lot of work regarding education and awareness in terms of how do, what do they learn from us in relation to the work, the grassroots work being done, but also building, I would say coalition, but kind of building up, you know, allies, building up a movement I'm using loosely, of people who can start small, but grow and grow, that our voices are louder. Because you know what? The religious right wing, they, you know, they are strong, and they're the ones with the voices. I'm saying that to say that the work we're doing is trying to see within the laws how women can be served. And for each family planning clinic, you know, they have windows in terms of serving, not with the procedure. And so those are things in relation to Guyana. When I first came and we didn't really have a licensed doctor, yet we could have began our work in terms of providing services, which are still vital in terms of the counseling, in terms of, and in terms of navigating them to where they can have, you know, the procedures done. I still have minutes? Oh.
Right. So I'm going to ask, each panelist is going to answer the first two questions, then we're going to come back to, but you already started answering your last question. So we're going to make a note of that to subtract. Okay, so I'll pass to Kobe now. And Kobe, can you tell us about your experience as a young man working in this arena? What drew you to the field and what has kept you there? And then after that, tell us a little bit about the organization you currently lead, the Guyana Responsible Parenting Association, the work that is done there to support access to safe abortion in Guyana. What's unique about GRPA's positioning? Yeah.
Well, thank you. Full disclosure, I was not born in 1995. I don't think my parents were dating at the time. But and also full disclosure as well, I was never interested in sexual and reproductive health and rights. I would even go so far to say that I was not also knowledgeable and also a supporter of abortion. Until in 2013, we had an economics teacher, and this is why teachers are powerful in terms of their influence over children. We had a teacher in fifth form who was teaching us economics, and she happened to be the president of GRPA's youth advocacy movement. And she was telling my colleagues in class, oh, there's just a group at this place on Common Street. You almost come on Fridays at 4 o'clock. And I took like 6 months before I went because I'm like, I just focusing on these subjects to like get someone to like come out to school. So I don't have time for that. But then as well, you know, my good friends, they joined GRP and they always came back to school talking about GRPA and these sessions and education and sex ed and addressing adolescent pregnancy. And in May, it was May 3rd, 2013, it was a Friday. I went into GRPA. I was 15 years old. And, you know, we were just talking about, well, not we, in terms of the session, it was about sexual and reproductive health, addressing adolescent pregnancy, talking about abortion rights and all of that. And you really had a group of young people who were eager to learn, but also to unlearn. And also as a young boy in school, we never had the opportunity to learn. And that's why GRPA was important for me, because I was not hearing that from my home and my family. At the time, social media was not what it was now. It was very calm and quiet, and I wish we could go back to that time for a number of reasons. But that opportunity was not there for the learning. And so, you know, it was actually 5 months into Pat Bisnauth's term as executive director. And Pat actually created the opportunities for young people like myself, you know, to build capacity, to go into communities. We had an incredible Body Boss project, which I think was the best thing to ever come out of GRPA, that really provided not just the education and awareness, but the services that we were able to deliver across the country. And so that was really my immersion into sexual and reproductive health. Interestingly, in 2015, I had a very problematic conversation with my father because he said to me, he had asked me to do something, and this is the first time I'm sharing it publicly. He asked me to do something, and I was like, I am just tired. And he said in a joking way, you see, if your money, take the money for the abortion in 97, you know, you want to stand up there for somebody. And my father has a very problematic sense of humor. But I didn't, at that time, I didn't find it funny. And I burst into tears. And I went to my mom, and that was a year before she passed. I was like, Marsha? She's like, oh my God, he told you that? I'm like, yeah, he did. And she was like, you know, she had just a few months given birth to my brother. And he gave her the money to go to medical arts. And she said to me that there was a female doctor in medical arts. I can't remember the woman's name. And this is why, as Pat was mentioning, counseling is really important. And she said to me that the female doctor said to her, you know, it's really your choice. It's your right. Do you want to have an abortion? And she said no. And so the woman said, well, it's not this man's choice, it's actually yours. And the law says that. Um, and that's how Kobe Smith is here today. But had my mother taken the decision to have an abortion, I mean, I wasn't going to be here today, but I was going to be okay with that. And there are a lot of women in Guyana who are not aware that the law provides that you don't need the permission of your partner. You don't need the permission of your parents. If you're, someone below the age of 18, and you become pregnant, you don't need your mother's permission. And that's why, as the example of the economics teacher who was influential, this doctor who was also influential in my mother's journey, we need to start to have this robust approach in sharing information because it's not, while it's available, it's not really accessible. And so I really wanted to say that, that was really my way in engaging in the particular issues. In terms of GRPA, Guyana Responsible Parental Association, we are the leading provider of sexual and reproductive health services in October, actually October 4th. We're celebrating 50 years as a registered non-governmental organization leading the provision of these particular services. And as Pat mentioned, we do provide abortion services, both medication and surgical. Charlene asked a great question as to, what makes GRPA stand out. We're the best. And I'm going to tell you why. Number one, we provide abortion services cheaper than any other private facility. And that's important because GRPA's main aim is not to maximize profits. And while, of course, yes, we have to and we want to make money, we're not like a private hospital that their first thing is about paying for every single thing you do. You go into a room, you got to pay a fee. You take a Band-Aid, you got to pay a fee. You have an injection, you got to take a fee. We prioritize health and well-being. And one of the things that I learned when I was a volunteer at GRPA was that, and one of the things that we still maintain now, is that we don't have a policy where we turn women away. There are many women who come into GRPA, and even though the cost is at least 50% cheaper than what a private hospital would provide, there's still some women who can't afford that. And our policy is we will accept what the women have. And that is why a couple of days ago, we launched for the first time the Her Right Fund. It is a fund where we're asking the public. It's not just about saying on your social media, yes, I support abortion rights, full stop. If you do support abortion rights and you do have that little way in your budget monthly, any amount, we're not asking for a particular amount, any amount you can provide via MMG or bank transfer for us to continue the access. Because there are women in Georgetown, there are women in Berbice, there are women in the hinterland who are unable to access these services. And while some will say, well, oh, they can go to GPHC, and while we know that GPHC provides great services, we understand that, we have to ask the question, if GPHC and other public hospitals, and not all public hospitals are providing abortion services, but if those public facilities are providing abortion services, we have to ask the question, why aren't all women going there for the services and they're choosing to come to private facilities? They're choosing to come to private facilities because number one, it's efficient. Number two, it's convenient. Number three, it's not necessarily those particular barriers in terms of stigma and discrimination and why you come in, you're a child, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the real questions that we have to ask. And I'm not here to criticize the public health system. It has done well and it is doing well. But I think in the 30th year of the abortion law passing, we have to ask women, why are they choosing to come to private facilities? That remains a legitimate question. And that is why we will continue to provide the enabling environment for those women to access the services in a way that they can afford. And if they can't, we are going to find ways in which we can subsidize it. I can say that we are already subsidizing it, because if we're providing it 50%, and this is since Pat is not who was there, I think Pat left in 2018. And for us to maintain that, it really says something about our ethos and our legacy. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you very much, Cody. And again, we're going to get a chance to come back and you're going to get a chance to ask questions. But let's hear from our fourth panelist, Laura George. So Laura, can you speak about some of the issues and challenges facing Indigenous Guyanese persons, especially those in the hinterland regions, with regard to accessing sexual and reproductive health care? And then what do you think could be done to increase access to safe abortion here for Indigenous Guyanese, particularly in the hinterland?
Thank you, Lena. Good morning to my fellow panelists and all who are here and joining us online. Probably before I go there, Lena, I would probably like to share a personal story of mine. I hope I have some time. So, as Indigenous peoples, you know, we have our Indigenous knowledge in relation to childbearing and all of those things, right? And as a child coming up, I'd always been an avid reader in high school in Georgetown because I had to go to Georgetown. I went to Campbellville Secondary School and we didn't have much teachers. So I spent the hours reading. I emptied the the library of the school, I think, and I just read. I believe it didn't have books on sexual health, reproduction, and anything else like that. And I was always a very quiet child. Well, after I came to Georgetown, I became very, very subdued and just really remained to myself. The point in saying all of this is when I turned 21, I felt like I was getting so old and life was slipping by. And I live in a home where I was constantly reminded by my parents that it is a sin to have sex outside marriage, and that the only time I should have sex would be with a man that marries me. It was always at the back of my head. So I kept to myself. I didn't think that I was missing anything. And as I said, I finished all the books in the school library. And after high school, I went to GTI and all of that. And when I started work in my first job, I felt like I really was, you know, missing out on life. I have friends, I saw friends who have boyfriends and all of that, but then this thing kept ringing at the back of my head that my parents are they who instilled this thing in me. We went to church and all of that. And at some point I decided that, you know, maybe I should just, if I just have sex at least, you know, just once, nobody will know, you know. My parents wouldn't know that I had sex. The world wouldn't know that I had sex before marriage. And I had sex once, like not even properly, and I got pregnant. I got pregnant for my first daughter. She's going to be 29 this year. That's the story that I have. And so there I am, having sex before marriage, I guess committed the biggest of sins. Going back into a community that was, you know, built on like you should never have sex and bring a child out of wedlock. And here is me, the most quiet of children, the girls, and a young lady who never created a problem for my parents or my guardians out here in town, but here I am as a single mom. The stigma and I guess the judgment and everything else that came through with it really was, it was there, but I think because of the support of my parents, who, you know, like, I didn't have to hear any judgmental statements from. They were very, very strong in the church. They were religious people. But I think that helped me to navigate being a single mom. They were the most supportive. I mean, I know that they were very disappointed, but they helped me navigate through life as a single mom, as a young single mom. I was 21 years old. My siblings who've been there. And the point I'm putting this all out is because it is important to lend support to our girls and our women. You know, you hear about all the different stories. We actually, as Indigenous peoples or Indigenous women in the communities, lived through very much what I say is colonialism. And when I say colonialism is coming from, that has been introduced through the church, that this is sinful, this is wrong, and we have churches, we have church members who are there who cast this very heavy discrimination and distinction of who is righteous and who is non-righteous. And that hasn't been helpful for Indigenous peoples, especially women and our girls there. So what is it like in the communities? I listened to how much work has been done, the legislation that was passed. And so when my daughter was born in 1996, the law was there, but prior to that, it was 95 when I would have gotten pregnant. And so I want to tie in the traditional knowledge, Indigenous people's knowledge, and the whole law legal system and what it means for us today. When I was with my grandmother, I was pregnant now, and I was with my, sorry, let me just go back a little. I was advised by an older Indigenous woman. She said, you know, you can have an abortion. And of course, it wasn't legal then. And she said that she can take me where, you know, she knows that she's been able to help other women go to. And this is a story I think I've never told anybody. I think I told a few other women as well, but not publicly at all. So, but all the way, I can't remember where she was taking me, but all the way heading there, I had two questions I had to address in terms of what if you go there? Because you've heard about women who die, you know, out of these practices. And so my thing was, so you thought that you can hide this, but now you're going to have an abortion because you don't want people to know that you've had sex before marriage. But what if you go and you die? Then the whole world will know that you've had sex before marriage anyways. But my most important point during that moment on the way of, you know, this introspection was, your dad has always spoke to you not to have sex before marriage, but now here you are pregnant, and now you're gonna go to have an abortion, which is an added sin, and it's gonna break your dad's heart even more. And what if you get damaged and you're never able to have a child at all anymore in your life? So I had all these different thoughts and so on. And I'm like, what if you have a child that you will really, really love, and a child that will mean something in this world to you and to others? And it was in that moment, and I turned to I know she was in front, the taxi. And I said to her, I said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And she kind of like gave a little giggle and she said, are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm sure. I'm sure of that. So it was in that moment I made a choice. Today I have 3 girls, and I always tell them, each of them, you know, when we have these teenage tantrums or whatever phases they're passing through, and they don't want this life, and they're so tired of life. And I said to them, I said, you haven't lived life yet, but I want to let you know that I made a choice to bring you into this world. I made those choices. And yes, life is not easy all the time, but life is great. Life is wonderful. And I always let them know, I said, I want you to know that in many cases, and I want the listeners to also understand this, that there are many girls and women out there who also do not have choices. They haven't had a choice to bring a child into this world or not to bring a child into this world. There are many women, young women, there are children, girl children, and young women and women, adult women even, who are forced either to bring a child into this world or who are forced not to bring a child into this world. So they don't have a choice. And it's wrong against girls and women. Now, if we were to go to Indigenous girls and women, I've tried to do a little research, and I have found that even though the law has been passed how many years? We're saying 30 years, Lena? 30 years, access to abortion is really still not readily available at all to Indigenous girls and Indigenous women. And so then we need to change that. And as much as you speak to GRPA offering these services, I don't know the extent of your services there, but as a government of Guyana or the state has the responsibility to get those services available to Indigenous girls and Indigenous women in the hinterland regions. And so we still do not have that. If it might be there, maybe like at Latham Hospital. We don't have any in the Upper Mazaroni, which I have confirmed. We don't have any in many hospitals or health centers throughout Guyana. We don't have the medical practitioners to conduct these services. But really, I think this has been like not even an important point of discussion in Indigenous communities, and that is the colonialism or the effects of colonialism I was referring to. The churches that came have really worked to eradicate Indigenous peoples, cultures, knowledge, practice systems when it comes to that area of deciding how we protect our girls and how we protect our women. So we have a contradiction in communities, and probably I may get some people that says that, well, Laura has never been, always contradicting something, but we have situations in communities where we get numerous reports of incest, grooming, statutory rapes. So our children, Indigenous girls, who end up being impregnated from those rapes. I know of cases where parents, guardians, take a decision for a child, for a girl, not to have any abortion because it is a sin. But they do nothing constructive, or they do nothing practical to change or to prevent the first sin or the first violation that a girl has to face. So a girl, this is like a literal girl, 9 years old, 10, 11-year-old girls, not being supported or enabled to be able to have that abortion. Here is a child who has to face the trauma of rape, and now has to live with a child being a child, or a child raising a child. So you have that whole situation in communities. And I shudder to think, I wonder, I haven't yet seen a child being a mother to a child. I have been unable to really comprehend what this must be like, because I know that even though I was an adult and became a mother as an adult, there was so many situations, so many emotions, so many responsibilities that I realized that I had to face. I used to enjoy sleeping, love to sleep. When I became a young mom at 21 years old, which in Indigenous communities, I think 21 is a lot older, I lost sleep. That's when I knew that sleep, you never get back sleep once you become a mother. Which is what I tell my adult daughters today, who are on the games on the phone and so on. I said, sleep. Because one of these days, when you become a mother, then you will realize how much sleep you used to lose. They say up to today that they are not going to make children. I leave it up to them. They have their thoughts about all of these, and they get those experiences from minding kittens, like literal baby kittens. And they had to wake up every 2 hours to feed the kittens, and they have to clean up the mess and so on. And then they say, Mom, I didn't know it's so hard to have a baby. I said, well, can you imagine if it were a real human baby, what you would have to be doing? So it's worse than that. It's a lot more responsibilities. But my point, and coming back to Indigenous communities and the real life and the real life situations is, again, the stigma that lives there. Then there's this whole misguided, I want to say, misguided notion that conducting an abortion is a sin. Only at that point does it become a sin. No, what happened before that was committed to a sin committed, the gravest of sin committed on a child are areas that are not being addressed. So we need to address those. But coming back to, are these services available? If these services are available to Indigenous girls and women, they have to travel long distances. Financial expenditure, and all of these things. So there's that discrimination, there's that inequality in access to services for girls and Indigenous women. Lena, you coming back to me, or should I continue on?
And there'll be time for questions, but thank you, Laura. I want to bring Fred back into the conversation, and we're all kind of going to this final question for all of you. So yes, it's 30 years now since this law was passed. But we've all heard stories and we all know that a lot more still needs to be done. So the question is, what still needs to be done right now to increase safe abortion across Guyana? And who needs to do it? What needs to be done? Who are the ones to do it? For PAC specifically, how can faith communities, what role could they play on the side of ensuring justice, not only talking about sin and that part of it. Yeah, so final question for each of the panelists. Looking ahead, what more needs to be done and whose responsibility, whose task is it? So Fred, I'll ask you to unmute and go first, and then we'll go down to the rest of the panelists.
Thanks, Sherlina. Let me ask you to show that last slide for me, please. But while you're getting that up, let me just say that there are a couple of things that Pat, Kobe, and Laura said that I want to hook onto. One, Pat mentioned the role of religious leaders. There were two religious leaders in Guyana who were particularly helpful to me, both Lutheran. One was Reverend Rodwell Tom, and the other was Reverend Dr. Orrin Cummings. They are both now living in the United States, but they did a lot to advance our work. An important thing that Kobe said was that he was not even born in 95. When I did a survey last year with a number of other people on the medical opinion, I was struck by the level of ignorance of the law. It was appalling. And then I said, hang on, let me check. It turns out that 28% of the health workers in 2024, when we did the survey, were not even born. And here's a more startling figure. 71% of them were not 10 years old. So the ignorance is not an individual problem. The ignorance is an institutional problem. And again, I point to the Ministry of Health, I point to the medical school, I point to the nursing associations, and I point to all the professional health associations. They have failed to transmit the knowledge of the law. So let me just put that there. And the last thing that Laura said about the access to Indigenous people, I completely agree. And once Lena, you are able to show that slide, the last slide from my presentation, we will take it there. So your question to me was, given the passage of the law, how do I feel 30 years later? One, I feel relieved, and the other, I feel disappointed and exasperated. I am relieved because some people are benefiting from the law. In fact, and some poor people are benefiting from the law, largely because of the work of one person, so far as I know, CMO, Dr. Narayan Singh, who almost single-handedly started to implement the law in 2016, 21 years after the law. He started, so far as I know, to introduce public hospitals to present abortions, to provide abortions. And so this chart that you're now seeing, if you could make it larger for me, this chart that you're now seeing is the story of what has happened in Guyana. From almost 2,000 admissions for complications of abortion, the figure is now down to almost zero. In fact, it is down to zero for sepsis. It is only the incompletes that are accounting for a projection of about 60 for this year. So in other words, from almost 2,000 to just over 50. Okay, so in a sense, you look at it and say, hey, that's a wonderful accomplishment. One, it took 30 years. It should have been accomplished in 15 years or fewer. Two, this is Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation. This is not the situation. I'm willing to say no, this is not the situation in the hinterland. However, Laura, I do not have information on the hinterland. I'm trying my best to get that information, but it is not proving easy. One, because of the ignorance of the law, people don't know. And by the way, the law, the survey of the medical people was a large survey. It was 518, far more than the required sample size. The interesting thing is that on average, across all the categories of senior health managers, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, social workers, the average knowledge of, or the average ignorance of the law was 77%. 77% of them did not really know the law. What is startling, really startling, is that the figure among senior health managers was worse. It was 88%. So it's really a shocking situation. So what am I disappointed about? The lack of knowledge of the law, the abject lack of interest of the Ministry of Health, the puny advocacy of women's groups. I'm sorry, but there's virtually no advocacy to the best of my knowledge. If there were, we couldn't possibly be in this situation. The lack of professional action from mid-level groups. Mid-level providers in Guyana can do lawful abortions in the first 8 weeks. Midwives, nurses, pharmacists, medics, and any properly trained person can do medication abortion in the first 8 weeks. That is the law. The ministry was opposed to that. We took them to court in 2013. We won the case in 2016. The court case is available. The decision from Roxanne George has been proposed, has been written. People don't know that. The health professionals, the medics don't know, the midwives don't know, the nurses don't know, and they're doing no effort to expand their professionalism. And the pharmacists, 94% of the pharmacists did not believe that only doctors can perform lawful abortions. 94. This has been the case since 1995 and confirmed in 2016. Okay, so you ask, what would I like to see happen in 2025 going forward? To begin with, the story that we have heard all along is important, although this had nothing to do with the law. The primary thing that I would like to see happen is education, sexual health, and reproductive rights education in schools. That is crucial if we're to get beyond this absurd bias that we have. The Ministry of Health and Education institutions need to do what they have not done in the last 30 years, which is incorporate the law in the education of new healthcare workers. Following on Laura's presentation, I think it is crucial for Toshaws to have voice. But I suspect almost all the Toshaws that I have met have been men. So why would they have an interest in women's health? So there are very few Toshaws, to the best of my knowledge, who are women. And I think they need to take the issue. a fundamental thing for Tashaws to do is just get the data showing the difference in the quality of maternal health and maternal mortality in the coastal area and in the hinterland. And that should spark some real discussion. All hospitals in Guyana, can lawfully perform abortions. District hospitals, regional hospitals can lawfully perform abortion. Yet when I contact them, they say, oh, we need to get license from the Ministry of Health. That is not so. The law permits all hospitals to do abortions up to 8 weeks. It is only those facilities that want to do abortions beyond 8 weeks that need to get permission from the Ministry of Health. They need to establish that they have the facilities to do it. I would also like to see mid-level health professionals registered. It is shameful to me that 30 years after the law, to the best of my knowledge, there is not one single mid-level professional who is registered to provide abortions. That, to me, is disgraceful. Until that happens, there is no way on this earth or on any other that women in the hinterland will have access to health care. I don't care how much telemedicine tries. It will. And by the way, there's an inflection on telemedicine that I would like to stretch here, which is that telemedicine may prove to be a mechanism for retaining the doctor-centered approach that we have. What we want to do is to empower mid-level providers to do the services. And I think when we do that, it might have an impact on women's willingness to go to public services. It may not, but it may well, because when they can get these services from a level of healthcare workers who are not men, it may make a significant difference. And finally, I would love to see, Shirlene, a revitalization of the advisory board. The advisory board has been captured by the Ministry of Health and destroyed by the Ministry of Health. The advisory board was set up as a non-governmental body. And one of the things that happened very early is that the CMOs took over the chairmanship of the board. That's ridiculous. The advisory board is supposed to be advisory to the Ministry of Health. How can it be chaired by the chief medical officer? The second thing that they did is they started employing government employees on the board. Recruiting government employees, people from the foster care, people from social welfare. Those were the people who were being onto the board. The advisory board is supposed to be a non-governmental body composed of women's advocates, composed of the media, composed of religious leaders, composed of groups in the community who have an interest in this issue. So that is essentially the extent of my relief and my disgust with respect to the journey we have struggled with in the last 30 years. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Fred. So I know there may be some ministry folks on the Zoom. Persons did sign up, so hopefully they are taking notes. So lots of important things. I'm gonna ask Laura and then come back down for you to add to that last question about what more needs to be done. But just one point. So Fred is saying in 2016, the law was amended to allow mid-level providers. So that includes MedExes.
Correction, Shirley. The law was not amended. The law was simply clarified. It is simply that Roxana George, we challenged the interpretation of the ministry in refusing to enact the law that was written in 1995. And all that Roxana George did, Justice George did, was say, yes, our interpretation is correct, mid-level providers. So that it has been the law since 1995.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. But so other persons, pharmacists, persons, this was partially, from what I understand, to make it easier and more accessible, especially for folks in the hinterland.
For medication.
And for medication, right? So to be the tablets. And these mid-level providers had to be supervised, and it didn't have to be direct supervision. It could be a phone call away. But we can talk more about that in the Q&A. So let's have Laura and then Toby and Pat. Last question.
Thank you, Rita. So what needs to be done, who needs to do it? The first thing that I think needs to be done is to raise awareness that there is this law, because as I said, I've worked with communities throughout Guyana, and this has never been a topic under discussion. You know, sometimes this is community leaders, they invite health, education professionals to make a presentation of what's happening, but with regards to like sexual reproduction and whatever termination services, that's not something that has been addressed. What has been addressed, as I said, was the continuous the cases of rapes and all of that. And something that I've said to leaders every time is, if we don't protect our children, who do you think will protect them? So raising awareness on what legislation is available, and as you said, what services is available, and really providing empowerment sessions for girls and women and the families and the village councils themselves to support our women is something that needs to be done. How will that be done? I think that can only come as well with communities meeting us with information as to what steps they believe that we can take. The state, Guyana, has an obligation to ensure that these services are also provided in law, in legislation, in practice, that is the implementation. That needs to get to communities as well. Because if communities don't know the obligations of the state, then how do they work to hold anyone accountable? So that's one of the things that need to be done. As well as really getting those services available to, for example, I'm from the Upper Marginal, and I have confirmed that our one cottage hospital, which is the Cameron Hospital, doesn't provide us services. And that's usually catered for the 8 villages in the Upper Mars. So it is denial of services, access to justice for our girls and women. And to meet that, we also need to have everyone on board. How do we raise awareness and get the churches on board? Because many of our communities or the residents are church-going members. How do we get them into this space of non-judgmental, this discrimination and all of this? Because we need to protect our own, you know, as I said earlier, we need to protect our own. What we also need to do is to actively promote Indigenous knowledge, as I said, of how we maintain, promote, and control our population. We have the family planning, you know, the tablets and the condoms and everything else actively being promoted. But what hasn't been promoted is how Indigenous people's own knowledge, our own knowledge, can also be used to promote and support our population growth. I can tell you an experience regarding my first daughter again. Here I am with a farm with my grandmother and grandfather, my late grandmother now. And she says to me, you know, Grandpa can control how you know, the girls get children and so on. And I said, how does he do that? And he can also, when you're ready, when you get a husband, that was the most important thing. When you get a husband, you're able to make a child. So I said, how does he do that? So, you know, own traditional knowledge. And so then said, why did you all not help me with that? You know, here I am, a single mom at 21 years old. And she says, well, how were we to know when you would start having sex? I'm like, I'm an adult mama. I used to call her mama, right? But I just want to say that, again, that is still like a taboo in communities. Indigenous knowledge, which is really helpful, which should be promoted, really is still taboo. It is colonized as a sin, or the colonials brought it as and taught us in the churches that it's a sin, which is a pity. And we need to raise back this to really promote raise awareness that Indigenous people's knowledge really is important and can transcend and support the formal family planning and the abortions or whatever, because I think the first speaker was a story was when it said, and which is what I truly, truly believe, is we should have a choice of whether we want to bring a child or we are ready to bring a child into this world. Because we should not have to bring a child into this world and be not ready financially, be not ready emotionally, because emotionally really ready is what you do with a child for the rest of their lives as well. So we should all be really empowered, get all the support that we can get. But really that also begins with the state ensuring that these are systems that they need to have in place.
That was a lot. Thanks. A couple of things I want to mention. And of course I want to repeat what Laura and Fred said. I think though in the broader scheme of things, we are not talking to communities in the ways that we should. I don't know, and I can speak for GRPA, we don't have research on abortion access or updated research. For example, post-pandemic, what exactly is the status or situation in Guyana when it comes to safe abortion post-pandemic? That doesn't exist. What we do have is information or data on, number of services delivered, etc., but not in terms of receiving that directly from communities, their experiences accessing services and so on. That's not documented. And I think we need to speak some truths about it, is that these processes cost in terms of data collection and research is not for free. And while I hear a lot, and I agree, education, awareness, training, capacity strengthening, we also have to talk about data collection. We also have to talk about resource mobilization, technical and financial. I can say to you, and as Pat knows, as CEO of CFPA, it is challenging for NGOs to mobilize funding. For example, we don't have any project that funds abortion free of cost. We of course find institutional ways to have that done. That is why we have launched this week the Her Right Fund, and we're asking Guyanese persons abroad, if you support abortion rights and you would like to do something about it, help us to do something about it. Donate any amount. We're not saying what the amount is. That in itself could contribute to safe abortion services, not just for the coast, but in the hinterland. We could also talk about capacity strengthening. We could also talk about what we're doing in the digital space. I know, for example, Charlena is usually in the comments responding to people, people who say abortion is murder, and and Charlena is one person out of so many who are really online trying to neutralize those kinds of toxic and negative comments towards or against women's access to abortion care. And I think we have to talk innovatively about what do we do in the digital realm, because most persons are there. It really sicks my stomach when I see, well, I don't even have to call them social media influencers or content creators, people on social media, if they want to spew hate and violence online, 5,000 people join one time. And I'm like, if we have a live video talking about abortion access 30 years since the passage, I don't think you're going to have 100 persons join. So I think we need to start having those serious conversations about how we use social media to mobilize people and to do that. I know that Fred made an incredible point about what local groups are doing. And while I hear the point, Fred, I think, and I don't speak for local groups, this is just my observation. There are a lot of communities in this country that are trying to stay alive. When we talk about domestic violence and gender-based violence, people want to know that women are not going to be stabbed and murdered and that their children are going to be safe. And so while, yes, we have all these situations that we need to address, And I'm not trying to make an excuse. I'm just saying that this is the present reality that we're dealing with. And I think that one of the things that we can perhaps talk about moving forward is perhaps, yes, how we engage with the Ministry of Health to do better with the advisory board, but perhaps maybe we can launch a safe abortion working group, you know, with NGOs and other partners who are going to mobilize resources, who are going to bring their energies together, who are going to engage in advocacy outside of an institutional structure of an abortion advisory board. What exactly are we doing? We're not seeing that. The other point that I want to mention, and in this country, we talk cavalierly about constitutional reform, and we only hear about constitutional reform when it comes to maybe executive powers of the president or what we can do with a particular commission of a government arm or something. There are some countries in the world, and 30 years after the abortion law in Guyana, perhaps we want to maybe look at France and other countries globally that have enshrined abortion rights in their constitution. And while yes, Guyana would have incorporated the right to health in our constitution, what are we as health providers, as advocates, how are we contributing to the constitutional reform process to say, yes, we have the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1995, but can we in fact say that 30 years later, if the Constitution under Article 153, I think it is, incorporates international conventions and so on, shouldn't we start talking about saying abortion has to be in the Constitution of Guyana 30 years later? That is the kind of advocacy, in addition to what Fred was talking about in terms of training health providers, ensuring, you know, there's equitable access and so on. We need to start taking up space and not have this constitutional reform process just being taken up by politicians who want to just talk about, you know, politics. We're talking about health, and perhaps we need to engage in that particular process. I think that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so as a faith leader, I think that the work which faith leaders are, well, persons of faith, and you would have heard me talk a lot about grassroots women when I spoke about our work with faith communities, and these were largely women. What you would think about like bottom house meetings. I think we need to do a lot more of that, and to have more of a community approach to how we dialogue, how we discuss in terms of, you know, what is impacting. And, you know, because people in these communities, they still are connected deeply. And when there's an emergency, yes, it's the women who will come together to help and to mobilize and to accompany and support. I want to touch on a point that Laura, a very important point that she made in terms of colonizing of religion. And this, especially, let me speak about Christianity, because Christianity was actually brought as a colonizing agency to help to maintain the kind of order in a plantation economy that would feed capitalism. And so, and a big part of their job, which was, you know, it was very astute in terms of strategy, was to Christianize, was westernizing, you know, slaves and then indentured laborers, and controlling people, controlling their bodies, controlling their sexuality. Because let us look at those countries which brought, you know, the colonizing, you know, drive in Christianity. They are free and enjoying sex, and they can talk about sexual pleasure. And what happened to us here? And then decriminalized abortion and gay rights, LGBT rights, you know, a long time ago. But guess what? We have become now those centers of power and influence in terms of maintaining what was used as an instrument of oppression, and we are the agents of oppression. So I think the work that really fundamental work that needs to be done is about decolonizing, which is unpacking, which is about, you know, and we've been doing some of this in our church. And I think the most effective way, and let me just cite one example. You see, I had a very strategic positioning as one being the executive director of GRPA, the SR, you know, a leading SRHR organization, and all the work that we were doing in sex education, conscientization, and also being a person, a leader in the church. And we would bring these youth together. So that changed dynamics, that changed the conversation, and the GRPA youth made a very big impact in terms of making those kinds of shifts. So I think we need more of a building of alliances, and these things, we don't have to depend on people in the status quo of the state. It'll be great also to have them as part of the alliances, but I think work that's being done on the ground. I was so happy to hear Kobe sharing about the YAM, because yes, a lot of work was done with YAM on you know, abortion and destigmatization, and talking about choice, and talk about, you know, body boss campaign. The body boss campaign was about, you know, enjoying the thought about me, I'm a woman, and not being ashamed of it. Is about talking about us as sexual beings. I mean, we are created by a creator. In Christianity, we learn from Genesis, you know, God created all of us in God's image, right? And then make compartmentalize. This is a spiritual side, this is psychology, this is sexual side. So yes, we are sexual beings, and people have sex. Well, I mean, that's why we're all here, right? And you know, just kind of taking the sting out of that kind of stigma about sex, because you know what? And Laura spoke about it personally and so really well in terms of our experience and that in our communities about how this is being used. And I think it's because there is that power in the pews, but that can really be unraveled and dismantled through, you know, that kind of alliance. And I've seen it happening even within our churches, because when I was a GRP and the church, there were so many stories that people felt comfortable coming to tell me about, the stories of incest, and some incest where the perpetrators were people with positions, you know, high positions in churches. So talking about sex in a meaningful way and a liberating way will be very, very helpful, because you know, this is liberating. I think also that in terms of I see a very important move is pressing for services. I mean, the law was passed not to have a great law and to boast about it. Yes, it's a great law, but really and truly, it was, you know, to open the gates that women would not have to die and go through what they go through, you know, but that we can live in a society that's free and open. By the way, there are 3 countries in the Caribbean, and I've been to Cuba, the first one in 61, then Barbados in 83, and Guyana in 95. And yes, I went there as a theologian, and I went to talk and to do some things at a seminary. We did talk about abortion, and I was so happy and excited actually to see the open way that the Cuban churches were talking about sex and sexuality and sexual pleasure, you know, and they did these, what do you call these theater, street theater things? Havana is known for that. And I went to Matanzas in the middle of Cuba, where they also spoke, you know, there was this whole project about older people and sexual pleasure. So I'm saying that I think we need to kind of elevate, advance these discussions, and not just discussions, to move it where we can be liberated. And also as alliances, we push for services in the public institution, because yes, it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that every woman with an unwanted pregnancy, in the first place, we shouldn't have unwanted pregnancy. No woman loves to have abortion. No, it's not a hobby. It's not. It is such a painful And it is such, a terrible experience to have an unwanted pregnancy and to go through having to deal with it in the first place. But that she will be able to make, her choice and to have safe and comprehensive abortion care. And you know what happens? And Fred may have more stats for us later. We find that, it avoids, when I spoke with older women in our church, some of them had as much as 15 abortions. It was used as contraceptives. And they said their mother-in-law would take them to this place, where they would get a local, and they didn't really know too much about what's going on. I also want to mention, I don't know if you were there was a civil society reproductive health group, which was set up by a former Minister of Health, monitoring the maternity wards of the hospital. And I was actually chairing that group as GRPA. But I want to say that I remembered when Laura was speaking, this 11-year-old who was pregnant. And you know what? They treated her as a child. She didn't know how many months, how long gone she is. They want to talk about what happened. And she was brought out from a hinterland community. She had no one to talk with. And so, these are things that as faith community, if our faith really is not grounded in, the love of God and in our responsibility as people of faith to ensure that every person can live a life of dignity, that we do believe and we practice, that God is a God of justice. God is a God of compassion, is a God of love, that all of us, and this is a quote now from John 10:10, which said, Jesus promised that I have come that all may have life in all its fullness. Unpack what that means. And so I think that we have a lot to build on, and a lot of work to do in terms of our alliances, and to speak out boldly, destigmatizing sex, because it's quite a duplicity, but it's a ridiculous situation, in a highly sexualized society. Yet we still get people who want to, wherever they can, in terms of controlling our thinking, and without thinking about the danger and the harm of what they're doing. And these are theologians, and I may be said to be so quick to say that they are not so engaged with people and people's reality. So for people of faith, what I would like to see, because this is my experience, to have a deep connection with the cries of women, especially women who experience health inequity and who are treated as, and othered, that they are not part of the mainstream of what should be included in our budgets and what should be part of our economy in Guyana. And I'd like to see more alliances, GRPA, Indigenous communities, and other women's rights organizations and others, in terms of speaking out boldly. And let me say LOL, I found another LOL as you were speaking, loving out loudly. And what does that mean for our call to serve, especially the least of these? So I look forward. Thank you.
Right, Lena. Yeah. Oh.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vidya, for saying amen on behalf of all of us.
Vidya was just saved.
So yeah, fully supporting again. Just pardon me for wanting to say one more thing, because I think when I said earlier that there are many women out there who do not have a choice, it has also come because of the gender-based violence that creates all of these things taking place, where a woman is forced to give sex, to bring a child into this world, and under those circumstances. And I think we have to strongly call out to the men in our communities in Guyana, that they also have a responsibility and obligation to protect our girls and to protect our women. And at some point, we will really need to also address the whole violence and the responsibility of the males in our country, and and to get them also to be on board. And we are not trying to eradicate or anything, raising our generations, but really we all need to have spaces where male or men and women are there as the care providers for our children. You know, that I really just wanted to follow up to the men as well.
Great. So thank you all to the panelists. That was really, there's a lot said there. I appreciate the sharing of the stories in particular, including the ones that, you know, hadn't been told publicly before. But I wanted to open up a space for questions or discussions from folks in the audience, both online as well as in person. So I see, raise your hand. You might have to come up to the table because for these people here, you have to stay close. Here. Yes. So if you don't mind, so just
yeah, so thanks very much. This is really interesting making notes because Kobe mentioned something, Laura. I'm glad Laura ended on this issue of gender-based violence because all of us who've been working on gender-based violence, we don't recognize, I mean, Sonia until recently really said that including the denial of sexual and reproductive health and rights is also a form of gender-based violence. And until we started doing that, sorry, not making that, just to say that, and it's probably not a question, it's just saying that I think we had great difficulty talking about gender-based violence in religious spaces. And for nervous people like me, I didn't want to add another element of religious consternation by introducing abortion as an issue of care. Until recently, and especially if you had a funding agency who might say, yes, we'll talk about gender-based violence, we do not talk about abortion. USDA, we know, right, has gone through that. So you got all these complications where you have the opportunities to educate, right? We're not living single issue lives where we only talk about gender-based violence, not about abortion and healthcare. So it's really for all of us who are doing all this work for justice and everything to talk about sexual and reproductive health and the fact that abortion is legal. And the dilemma I had, of course, is that after saying that, all I could say is call GRP in Georgetown, maybe borough to Georgetown to find out how you can get access, you know, but I'm doing it in a very gentle way to say, to acknowledge that some people might be against abortion in these settings. So this is a really important point I think that was raised, and Laura's point is really critical, that part of gender justice for all of us, men included, who are involved in this work, to understand that access to safe abortion, regardless of our personal views, is part of gender justice. So I'm just adding that into the thing. And I just wanted to ask one question. Do you need a licensed practitioner to deliver the medicated abortion? I don't know. Meaning the tablet, to administer the tablet. This thing with the license thing you never get.
What if you want to answer that, or do you want me to say what I know?
Okay, well, the two of you do it because
well, what I know is that every person's need to be on a list. They need to have done some kind of training, even for the medication abortion. So the pharmacist, yeah, there just needs to, it's not a complicated training, and then they go on a list, like the approved provider list. So it's just one step that needs to happen, but it's not a very burdensome process. But people don't even know that they could be part of that, I think is what one of the barriers is.
Yeah.
Correct?
The other point too, because the law refers to licensed medical practitioner, and in addition to Charlene's point where, you know, the medical council has a list of providers, you have to be licensed as a doctor, as a midwife, because, you know, when you finish studying and, you know, you're approved by the nursing council or the midwifery council or the pharmacy, correct. So in terms of interpretation, it's two ways, because you have to be a licensed medical practitioner first and foremost, in addition to what Charlene said.
Just very quickly, so the petition that GRPA actually had Kamal Ramkaran is a person, the lawyer, a pro bono lawyer who worked on this with help from Fred, but there was Rebecca Gumbert, who's really a leading person and Women on Waves helping us with this. The whole aim, we had done the training. We did training, brought nurses from all over Guyana, including the hinterland communities. And so it was a declaration passed by the court that mid-level providers can provide abortion. I think it's important to say. So that is already passed and it's available. I mean, we can share that petition, you know, that people have it in hand and it's not long to read. It's like a one-page thing. But what has happened, and Fred is really expressing his frustration, is that the practice has not begun. So because the law said a licensed practitioner, abortion is abortion, it doesn't say, you know, for except, you know, that only for surgical, because whether it's medication or surgical. So I think it's one of the things we talk about moving forward, that this act can really be put into place and people be, the system be strengthened to have nurses and midwives trained. And now you see it's a great opportunity with telemedicine. Telemedicine, I've checked with doctors, you know, in the hinterland, and they said, you know, it's working out really well. And I did attend a session where Dr. What's his name? The man who was heading this, he was giving, I was so excited by what is happening, and I came back home to find out, you know, more about it. So it's a great opportunity that people in the villages, you know, they don't have to, you know, they go through the lack of access to it.
Thank you, Pat. I see two hands on the Zoom. So Danuta first, and then Akola. You can each unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Oh, and then I see two in the audience here. Well, let's give the online people a chance first. So go ahead, Danuta. You can unmute.
Yes, thank you, Shirlena, and yeah, thanks all the speakers. The panel was amazing. I see there's some slides here. I'm not sure what those are, but yes, but I wanted to speak to the thing because Fred you know, mentioned about the advisory council, and I do know that when that abortion bill was passed by the Minister of Health at that time, right? Those of us who were in the forefront of advocating for safe abortions and for this act, right? We made representation to the minister that we needed, right, to have space on that advisory body so that we could monitor and ensure that the act would be implemented as written. That never happened. And it has always been a great concern of mine. I've had many, many conversations, including with Pat, about the advisory body, even when GRPA was on it. So that continues to be a very important thing. The other thing about advocacy and so on, I mean, this is an amazing, you know, discussion and so on. So I think we cannot leave here without, you know, at least solid, you know, making solid in some kind of way some of the really good recommendations made by Kobe, by Pat, and by Laura. Right. So I would really like that to go forward. I think, yes, we do need to set up some kind of network of persons who have an interest in this. And, you know, we have people with a huge amount of information, technical knowledge, et cetera, you know, to start the advocacy, because I think that that is really what needs to be done. The advocacy and the education. because we, as we said, we have some really great recommendations, and I would really like us to move forward with that. The other point I want to make was that recently the government of Guyana, they had to go before the UN body for their universal periodic review. And, they boasted, the Guyana government, the representative boasted that levels of adolescent pregnancy had dropped, remarkably in Guyana and so on. However, I did do the research and that was not true. In fact, the data that they were using was completely wrong. And Guyana, right now, according to the World Bank, and this was a 2022 report, has by far the highest level of adolescents pregnancies in the Caribbean. And we are way higher than the second highest country, which is Belize. And therefore, and that data reflected, I think it was 15 to 19. That is adolescents between the age of 15 to 19. But as Laura said, and we see it sometimes in news reports and so on, 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds in Guyana are giving birth. So it's probably even worse than that. And what we know in terms of pregnancy is that there is the morning after pill. Once unprotected sex has happened, right? There is a possibility of using that pill, which is like a contraceptive. And, there's been a lot of recommendations and advocacies that at every health center in Guyana, they should have that pill, and especially for young people, right? So I just wanted to make those points.
Thank you, Danuta. I think you're kind of preaching to the choir here, but good points. I just want to get other folks in the conversation. So Akola, you can go next, and then we'll come to the two in the room here. Thank you, Danuta. Akola?
Thanks, Lena, and thanks to all the panelists today. It was really, really great learning about the history and some of the challenges that you've had really passing the law and just our current state today. I think something that really connects this conversation is just the importance of like a reproductive justice framework. Often when we talk about abortion, it tends to be really choice centered, like a woman's right to do this or not to have an abortion. But when you look at it within this reproductive justice framework, it ensures that not only are they able to have this right, but they're able to raise children in safe and supportive environments. So this means safety from violence within their homes, communities, having accessible spaces that are environmentally healthy, and living wages, education. These are all things that make up reproductive justice. And I think like some of the siloed approaches we've been having related to the movement so far is a small part in why we have not necessarily gotten to where we need to be. And so I wanted to pitch to the panelists, and I guess whoever else might be working in the space, is how do we think that having a more reproductive justice framework rather than a rights-based framework would really help to recenter reproductive health, autonomy, and decision making within Guyana to ensure that we're moving towards futures that ensures women's autonomy as much as their capacity to actually raise children in these safe environments if they choose to have them. That's it from me.
I think that instead of rights-based, what would it?
A justice framework.
A justice. Okay, great, excellent.
Right. So do you, folks on the panel, Pat, do you want to take a stab at that? Okay. Do you want to answer that? Take a stab, sorry, that's a bad.
Thanks a lot, Akola. Really very good question. I think that one of the things, yes, in terms of our messaging or advocacy or work with communities, we have to understand our people. We have to also in terms of, language where they're at. I'm not surprised that people say, they don't know about the law. I mean, as in the case with many laws, that's not to say that people education shouldn't be done about the law, but I don't think people, they're really very focused there because what they need is for, it to be an instrument. So they need the instrumentalization as such. So sometimes, like choice, it seems that people will say, they take choice in a very light way to say that, and then we get it bogged down in a discussion of life and what is life, and when we are making choice, whose choice. But what Akola is raising here, I think is a great way to have us kind of reimagine and reframe with, a framework of justice, gender justice, which is with an intersectional approach, because we have women who are, coming from different walks of life. We have migrant women. We have, women who are, living, with disabilities. We have poor women. We have queer women. And so I think a justice framework that people can actually frame would be kind of, much more transformative in that approach and in how we see this, because it's really will be done in the language of women. So in the church, even at levels I worked at international level, they do get bogged down by the human rights language. And I think more justice grassroots approach will be a transformative action, a gender transformative action that will really help. It's not just about countering, whilst it is countering, but what it's doing, it's lifting up. It's lifting up. And who is doing the lifting up? It means that the space belongs to especially the marginalized and the vulnerable women to really give shape to this.
Thank you, Pat. Right, so this is just one event and one conversation. There are many more and lots more work to do, to be done. Two questions from folks in the room.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great presentation, by the way. I'm actually surprised that we're at the University of Guyana. We don't have much turnout, but nevertheless, as you said, just the one of many to come. My colleague before actually asked the question I wanted to, which had to deal with women autonomy and so forth. But my next question actually would go to Mr. Nunes and Mr. Nunes and Ms. George. Based on the information that was given and the stats I noticed that were shared, in Guyana, what would you think, or what would you advise would be the best age to start sex education in the school? Because looking at your numbers in the hinterland areas, we know that there's certain resources, as you rightfully said, there is an inequality of those resources. And so I think that as a mom, especially of a young child and a daughter, what age do you think is best to start sex education? I had other questions, but I'll keep those. The other one was actually for Phoebe and Madam Pastor. Based on your work and the organization that you represent in the Caribbean with the other countries that pass the abortion law, what are some of the lessons that we can take away from them in order to promote?
Let me get the other question and then answer. If there are any other questions, now is the time because we are coming to the end of the program.
This question is for Pat and Ms. Laura George. I don't know Kobe's religious background. I don't really mention it, but taking taking into consideration women who want to have children but cannot get pregnant for whatever reason, and religious beliefs of children being a blessing from God. And so how would you advise a woman, or how would you work with a woman who wants to have an abortion for whatever reason?
Sorry, what was the question?
Taking into consideration women who wants to have children but cannot have children, whatever reason, and children are a blessing from God, religious beliefs, how would you work with women who want to have abortion?
Who want to have abortion?
Yeah.
So if I understand, the women who want to have abortion are not the same women who can get pregnant. That's just something to take into consideration. Okay. Okay. So we have, I think, 3 questions. So
I'm trying to well, I can respond to the question about the age appropriate nature of sex education. And I think it's time, I mean, in 2025, we need to seriously relook at how we see sex education in our culture. Because a lot of times you only think about it in a formal school setting. But as parents, as guardians, sex education should start from home. But we put a lot of burden on parents when they themselves don't even know how to talk about sex. But if we look at it in a non-traditional sense, and if we also take into context and we're seeing the data coming out of the Ministry of Human Services about the high rates of child sexual abuse in Guyana, of course, we should know that sex education should be age appropriate. I know persons who have children, and even at the toddler stage, I mean, they're not bringing out the book talking about what is sex and all of that, but it's telling them, you know, about body parts. It's telling them about, you know, ensure that, you know, no one touches you here in any inappropriate way, and you let me know as a parent. And so instead of just waiting for us to talk about how we incorporate sex education into the HFLE program, which is, as we can accept, wholly inadequate, I think we can also talk about how we reform the thinking of sex education to include communities and also build their capacity. Instead of waiting for children to come into school, the school system to do that, when in fact we know that the HFLE program is not adequate, there's not sufficient time, and even for organizations who go into schools in a very short-term, temporary way, you pretty much get maybe 45 minutes. And, you know, a lot of schools don't even get a full complement of sex education when NGOs go in. And so we really need to do a lot of work in communities and families. We also can use the social media space. There are a lot of children, a lot of toddlers who are, well, in some contexts, unfortunately, scrolling through TikTok, scrolling through, you know, YouTube and so on. How do we channel this information in that particular context for the social realm in an age-appropriate way? So regardless, how do we bring this information to 6-year-olds, to 7-year-olds, to 10-year-olds, to 11-year-olds? Because they're all susceptible to those particular risks in our culture and in our society. In terms of what we can learn from the other countries that abortion is legal, I think 30 years later, perhaps we could start having a conversation with providers about whether, for example, the 8-week abortion upon request accessibility point of entry, whether we need to expand that 30 years later. Because, for example, in Cuba, it's 10 weeks. In other countries, it's 12, sorry. In other countries, it's more than 8. And so 30 years later, what can we do to, of course, hear from doctors and also hear from women as well? Because there had been a debate in some states in the US where there was this 6-week abortion ban, where a lot of women aren't even aware that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. In some contexts, and some women don't even know that they're pregnant at 8 weeks. And so we need to start listening to women and also hear from doctors as well. What do they think? And what have they seen over the past 30 years for us to make particular amendments? For example, there had been an amendment of the Domestic Violence Act of 1996. I think that amendment passed in 2024. It's been 30 years now since the passage of the abortion law. What can we do to improve? That's what I think we should think about.
Right. Dr. Nunes had to go, but he messaged, he wanted to mention a book, which it ties into what Kobe just talked about. This book is called A Brief History of Misogyny, which is hatred of women, which I think is maybe very relevant to why we are in the situation that we're in. Yes. So after this, we will be wrapping up. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I get your question because it's one of people think about and will not ask. So thank you. Yeah, so there are women who choose not to have children. It's their right to decide not to have children. There are women who would wish and long for and really want to have children, and they're not able to biologically to have children. Now, you ask that question in juxtaposed with those women who now are pregnant and want to have abortion. I hear the difficulties and I see the tension, but I think we have to recognize that women who seek this essential and necessary service are women who really who find it necessary to abort the child because it's an unwanted pregnancy. I spoke about Camille, and I know from GRPA, listen, the stories I have from GRPA, a woman who find out that she's pregnant, women have rolled on the floor, they have bawled because of what this means. Women, I always remember this girl of 16 years old. She threatened her parents to commit suicide. She was impregnated by her grandfather. So there are various circumstances. So one of the things I think we need to talk with is to understand that woman's pain, that she would like to be pregnant, and then she's looking at somebody, hey, but you're pregnant and you want to abort it. But that woman has a life. She has her experiences. She knows why she needs for this to be terminated to set her free from that. And I think it's about respecting, and the respect comes from understanding deeply. I don't know if she addressed it to both of us.
There was a question, what is the best age to start sex education? I think that's so, it's such a challenge in terms of what is the best age. I think as parents, we have to pay close attention to the surroundings, the times that we have social media. Children have so much more access to information than we would have ever had during our lifetime. So information, they have access to information that can use to raise awareness, to empower them, and to empower them in the sense that here are situations that can take place. How do we protect you? These are important for you to talk to us about to protect our children. I have a little experience in terms of my daughter. Like, those were questions I had. Like, when did you talk to her about this? Years later, because I wasn't paying attention, there was this show that they would be watching, actually, Family Guy. I'm listening to the language, and one day I listened to it. I said, what is it that they're listening to? And then he said, Mom, what are they talking about? And then I realized it's a lot, it's sexualized and this toxic comment. I don't like it. And I was like, Mom, you know how long you watch it? You know how long you watch it? And then I realized that I hadn't been paying attention. I was a teacher at one time. And my was one of my pupils in primary school. So what is an appropriate age? I think it's very important to talk with children, like introduce it by and by, that there are boundaries that we need to set, that we have to set, that for others not to touch them, this is inappropriate, or if anybody touches me to say, but just talk to them. I've also listened to parents who talk about educating their children in terms of, boundaries and what is inappropriate and why we need to talk about it, tell someone about it. And even though that has taken place, we have found reports or heard reports of children still being molested, you know. So it's such a challenge, and it requires everyone to be on board. And as I was saying earlier, there has to be all parents, school systems, every other adult that have to look into raising awareness of our children. So what is an appropriate age? I remember at one time with my first daughter, I was thinking like at which point do I get to talk to her? And she was already going to Brendan's college. And then one weekend she comes home and she says, Mom, look, I took her to our school and they were talking about sex, and I'm like, oh no, I was going to be talking to her about this first. Because I don't know how to introduce it to her. So then she talked about the different condoms they shared and the use of condom, and so then I had to, let's take a step. This is teaching this. I had to do it now with her into letting her understand that teaching her about sex and sex education doesn't mean that she should now just go off and start having sex. That's not what it means. I have to bring it to her like that. And I think that's one of the things that many, many parents are scared of as well. When we talk about sex education in schools, I have heard parents openly say, oh, we're promoting, we're encouraging our children to have sex before marriage or sex. I'm like, no, I said, no, it has to be so tailored that we are teaching our children, parents, right? This is what happens, but this is how we can help you. And as I was saying, as an adult, I was there thinking that, okay, I'm just gonna hide everything. And I for 21-year-old, I didn't even think about, oh, I'm gonna get pregnant. And again, that was my mom that was asking me, so when is it you saw your period? And I said that date. And when did you have sex? That date. And then see she doing her hands like this. And then she said, yes, you would have gotten pregnant. It was that period. So I said, like, what do you mean? And this is me having gone to school in Georgia, read the books, and so on. And I said, like, what, how do you know that? And then she said, oh, because there is this. And I said, so why did you never tell me what is before? I'm already pregnant, I'm big, well, I said, why did you never tell me what is before? She says, well, I didn't know that you would start having sex already. And so, again, with my daughters, this is my personal experience. At which point do you start talking to them about this? It has to be very open. Parents need to be very open with their children. They need to be open with the other children that I think in school, if I can remember mine, when you remind, I don't think we spoke about it in primary school. And I think that was an injustice to the children. So even the formal educators, we also need to be educated before we can get into the classroom with it. Okay.
Okay, well, we are over time, but I feel like I want to sit here longer, but I think we're going to come to this out just now. But I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Dr. Edwards, for her to do closing. But I want to just thank all of the panelists and all of you here as well. But Lisa will do the informal closing. But yes, let's keep having these conversations, stay in touch with each other. Right.
All right, so I'll make this very brief as possible. But just as a very quick recap, when we started, Charlene shared that this milestone is not one for celebration, but it's also one, but more so one for deep reflection, where we are, how it all came to be, and where we are going. I think that is a very key takeaway in recognizing this anniversary. Our panelists, all of them, Dr. Nunes, Reverend Bisnauth, Kobe Smith, Laura George, have all given very insightful reflections on this process, on the religious aspect, talking about the organizing of how the law came to be and the different groups that work together in having this here, the effect it has on our hinterland communities, as well as what NGOs like the GRPA are doing in continuing to push this work. I also put there key points I'd like to highlight, but I know time and so on. But I really appreciate the points calling for greater accountability by the state and the presentation made by Ms. George in raising that point, especially given the measure that we see coming out this year in our budget. What are some implications that can be drawn in what the government is offering for Guyanese women in giving birth, right? Because we've highlighted that the finances is a critical element in how women and girls are able to access these abortion services. Also, what I noted throughout each presentation is the importance of stories based on our lived experiences, and to continue to not only combat misinformation, but encouraging and educating about what we have there on our books, in our laws, etc. And finally, the need for collective action. So it's not just placing it on one body, but calling for greater accountability from our government, our state, but also collective action as NGOs, as layperson on the ground, community members, wherever you are positioned in your respective space. So I'll end it there, but before I wrap up is really to give thanks to our panelists once more, to Tamake Feminists for the funding support that they've provided for the main organizing party, Green Heart Movement, Red Thread for the use of their Zoom account, Shaquille Rodney and Catherine Chase from GRPA, Maeve Ramsey from the Red Thread Youth Network, Adrian Lashley from the Green Heart Movement, Yasmin Fazil, representing UG Fem, and Angelita Chattergoon from UG Community, as well as Christine Samwaru from the Bread Food Collective, and Shalina Najir. Your name is not here, but I still want to mention it. Thank you all for spending this time with us. I know we have colleagues from TAIN who are logged in as well. So the in-person audience and our online audience and panelists, just thank you, many, many thanks for being able to pull this off. And I think we can wrap from here. Yeah. All right.
Thank you to Dr. Edwards, Lisa for also her help and support, and to Jolana who is videoing, and to everyone who's here. There are snacks at the back. There's more snacks and coconut water, so help yourself take some home. And yes, and we would love to come to TAIN, for example, and have this conversation. So keep it going. Thanks, everyone.